Amazon is coming for grocery.
And according to today's guests, most retailers are trying to fight that battle the wrong way.
They've spent billions on fulfillment centers, delivery programs, and technology that still doesn't solve the biggest problem.
Labor.
There are nearly 300,000 people picking groceries in stores today, and the demand is growing faster than retailers can hire.
So what if the answer is a robot in the aisle of your local grocery store?
Not a science project.
Not a humanoid. A real business deployed in stores solving a real problem.
This isn't a conversation about robots.
It's a conversation about whether grocery retailers can compete with Amazon.
Stay with us and learn how grocers compete with Amazon.
You're listening to the Retail Razor Show, where your expert hosts and their guests cut through the clutter in retail and retail tech.
Welcome back to Season 6 of the Retail Razor Show, the top-ranked indie business management and marketing podcast on Good Pods, and the original show in the #1 indie podcast network for retail. I'm Ricardo Belmar.
And I'm Casey Golden. Welcome back, Retail Razor fans, to retail's favorite podcast, where we cut through the clutter to bring you the sharpest insights from the leaders redefining retail, technology, and the future of business.
Casey, I don't know about you, but I feel like we've been promised robots for most of our lives.
Right? Like, I thought I'd be in the era of the Jetsons by now.
That's right, right? Right?
And somehow, none of them have folded my laundry. I have to do my dishes.
Yeah.
And why can't somebody else do my Amazon returns? You know, something that actually gives me my time back.
Yeah.
Yet. But in all seriousness, robotics has spent years living somewhere between science fiction and PowerPoint presentations. Meanwhile, retailers are dealing with very real problems today.
And, grocery may have the biggest one of all. Online grocery continues to grow. I know I'm a user right here. Labor costs keep rising, and retailers are being squeezed between customer expectations and some very difficult unit economics around eGrocery.
And, I'm always one to say, like, shopping's fun. However, when it comes to grocery,
not so much.
It's not enjoyable every single time. It's
That's
kind
right.
of a chore most of the time. Which brings us to today's guest. Hank Crawford has spent his career building autonomous systems, first in trucking and now in retail, alongside his co-founder, Jagmer Han Saglam. He founded Collar Robotics with a simple belief. Retailers don't need another billion-dollar fulfillment center. They need a solution they can deploy today.
Yeah, so Collar Robotics is taking a very different approach. If you frequent LinkedIn, you've probably seen a glowing recommendation, or possibly many, from Britton Ladd on multiple posts for grocery brand leaders to meet with Hank and his team and learn more about what they're doing. And you'll see why as we get into it today. We're not talking about humanoid robots. There's no massive CapEx investment. No 5-year implementation timelines. Instead, they're putting purpose-built robots directly into existing grocery environments, into their existing workflows, and combining them with remote operators around the world to lower the fulfillment costs by as much as 50%.
Perhaps the most importantly, they're betting on something that doesn't even make sense for Amazon to replicate. Your local grocery store, in fact, our second guest, Paul Harker, retired Chief Commercial Officer at Woolworths Group, Australia's largest retailer, recently joined as a strategic advisor because of his strong belief in the solution for the future of grocery.
Today, we're going to talk about the economics of eGrocery, why centralized fulfillment pretty much failed, what robotics generally gets wrong in this scenario, and whether retailers already actually have everything they need to compete.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in grocery, retail, logistics, or kind of like me, just simply curious about where robotics is finally finding product market fit, you're going to want to stay in for this one.
Yeah, but before we get started, we'd like to give a quick thanks to our sponsor, Retail Club. Join 2,000 retail leaders at the Retail Club AI Festival, September 22nd to 24th in Huntington Beach, where you'll dive deep into how AI is reshaping retail while soaking up some sun at a fully outdoor beachside venue. Decision makers from retailers and brands can attend with free tickets and up to $1,250 in travel reimbursement. Head to retailclub.com to learn more today. Thank you to Retail Club for helping us bring you this podcast and the other shows in our podcast network.
I'm already booked, and anybody is welcome to join me at my 6 a.m. walk in the morning. So, all right, Retail Razor fans, let's go. Let's meet Hank Crawford and Paul Harker from Blue Collar Robotics.
All right, let's dive in. Hank, Paul, thanks for being with us today.
Glad to be here. Good to be here.
Excellent. So, Hank, I think it makes sense we just start right in with the problem we're talking about here, because I think most people probably have no idea how big the problem actually is. And I know you've said before that there are nearly 280,000 people just picking groceries in stores across the US today, which is a pretty staggering number of people just doing picking in the house and in grocery stores. So why is grocery fulfillment still a challenge? Why do we think this is still broken?
Well, it is a problem. 280,000 is a staggering number because eGrocery is a big business today. People enjoy that convenience of, ordering the groceries online.
Yeah.
And so right now you have all of these people picking the groceries, and the industry was faced with, how do we handle this e-commerce business that's growing, and we have to deliver orders. So the first approach, or the main approach that they would look at, was like, well, let's just do what the e-commerce people do and let's set up a big warehouse somewhere and fulfill all the groceries there. Well, the problem is that failed because groceries are different than normal e-commerce products. So you have the location. In order to have, to be able to really fulfill this, you'd have to have, it's volume dependent. So if you have to fulfill a lot of orders, it's very volume dependent. So you'd have to set up a facility. They call them these central fulfillment centers somewhere away from the store. So they're very volume dependent. And then what the problem is they're now moving the inventory away from the customer. And so now you're actually further away from the customer to deliver it. And then finally, you have fresh. In grocery, you have fresh. So how do you handle, meats and bakery items and all of those sort of things? And then finally, they have a big CapEx. The stores would have to spend a lot of money on basically building these facilities where they already have these facilities. So they went through this trying to automate it like the e-commerce people would do it. So today they're back basically in the store. They didn't work out, and they're back in the store with those 280,000 people fulfilling groceries. And what's interesting is because they have this volume, they're actually now trying to automate those people. So they're trying to give them tools to make the people basically work faster or more efficient in the store. But the reality is that humans, you can't automate humans. So they're back kind of with this big problem of the high volume for e-commerce, but they're really stuck with having people, those 280,000 people fulfilling the store. And maybe Paul would have some comments on this.
Yeah, I think, there's a sort of ecosystem of solutions. And as Hank spoke about, you've got sort of CFCs, which are, highly automated, but you need density and you need a lot of CapEx to do them. You've got MFCs, or where they've actually taken a physical store and created a space adjacent to it to automate some of the orders. But to do that, you require high CapEx. You need the space. You need the space next to the store.
Right. Yeah.
And it's only solving part of the problem. So you're left with retailers want to utilize the major asset they have, which is their already existent physical store footprint, which is actually closest to the customer, doesn't require duplicate inventory, but they have to somehow integrate that into their standard store process, and also the fact that they have physical customers coming into the store, which is why you've got this tension of people running up and down the aisle with carts picking somebody else's order, whilst you're also trying to shop, because you're trying to find people to pick the orders. And those people don't want to work unsociable hours through the night, early hours of the morning and stuff. So you have this sort of convergence happening with everyone wanting to do something in the physical store at the same time. It's the most practical solution, but you're just getting this tension between the online customer and the in-store customer.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've seen that myself at grocery stores and I've seen so many other people who are visibly irritated, right? That are just your regular consumers shopping, and they feel like they're getting in the way of the ones picking groceries for somebody else.
Yeah, it's like in New York, I want New Yorkers to have their own like part of the sidewalk where all the tourists have to be in their own like lane and they can hold hands over there. Going down a grocery aisle with like two missions. Yeah. So let's talk about like the elephant in the room. You've been very direct about this, Hank. You've said Amazon is coming after grocery. Not might, but is. Why do you think, why are like traditional retailers, like, are they underestimating this threat?
Yeah, I don't think they are. I think everybody understands how powerful Amazon is. I mean, Amazon is experts at e-commerce, and they're getting into every different segments and going after them. But you have grocery, which is this massive, basically segment of products, and they definitely are going after it. But the problem is that it's difficult, as we mentioned earlier. Groceries are difficult to automate. So even though they're coming after it, they've had a challenge. So they just kind of are chipping away at it. And now it's difficult, I think, for the grocer, because if they try to just like go back to the CFC, or they try to say, have some automated solution, they're trying to compete with Amazon, what Amazon is an expert at. So they're sitting there, they're saying, okay, Amazon's coming with our business, and we know they're coming. What can we do? And we know we can't really compete on Amazon's turf. So we need a different solution. And that's really where, because the advantage they have, the grocer really, is they have the footprint. They have all these locations in every local market. And that's really the strength of the grocery store. But the problem they have is they just really need a good solution to be able to automate and really, automate these orders and really use their existing asset. And that's why we really started this business, is really to provide a good solution or allow them to help them compete against Amazon and really maintain their competitive advantage.
I imagine they can't wait another 5 years.
I think retailers, sorry, Hank.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think your retailers have been wrestling with this, as Hank said, because they operate in all channels, and their core customer is still the in-store shopper. Over 80% of retailers' business is people physically shopping in their store. So they have this tension of trying to go, well, we need to grow and protect our online business, but not at the expense of what our core business is. And at the moment, Amazon has tried not very well to move into the space of a core retailer. Yeah, they've acquired Whole Foods. They've had a couple of independent goes themselves. And I think they're learning that actually physical grocery retailing is not the same as, retailing online. So you sort of got these two areas sort of coming together, wrestling with the fact that it's very difficult to do both well. And of course, there's an economic challenge that you need to wrestle with as well in terms of your P&L. It is more expensive to service an online customer than it is someone who comes into your store. And so you've got that tension as a retailer where, you don't really want to have your physical customer subsidizing your online customer, whereas Amazon's business, their web services business is far bigger. Like they've got cross-subsidization going on, and being able to prepare to take poorer economics on online groceries whilst they figure stuff out, and retailers are trying to wrestle with that. So I think what Hank and the team are trying to do is actually come up with a practical solution to help retailers, if you like, manage the fact that they have to operate in these two worlds where, physical retailing is still going to be the largest part of their business for quite some time, whilst e-com steadily grows.
Yeah, it's a great point. I guess that way, in a sense, what we really want to do is find the best solution that helps the retailer leverage the store as the primary asset here in their way to put up a wall or put up a moat around what Amazon hasn't successfully done, right? Versus trying to make the battleground, the e-commerce sign that Amazon is pretty much you can call the hands down expert at. So I guess that brings us into why we're talking today, right? Which is, how does something like robotics help here? And I've always I feel like it seems like we always hear reports about fancy robotics demos. I mean, it's been all the rage these last few months to see videos all over YouTube of humanoid robots doing dances and doing all kinds of acrobatics and things, as if that's supposed to prove to us that that's going to be the answer. That's what's going to help.
They're
solve the
unable to
problem.
fold a towel.
Yeah, right. You still have. I haven't not seen one successfully fold towels yet. That's true.
No,
That's true.
not yet.
So Hankman, what's really prevented the industry from delivering the outcomes that retailers need in grocery with given where robotics stands?
Yeah, so robotics, again, as an industry, is very healthy and very large. That the robotics that are out there today are kind of in the warehouse. So even Amazon, millions of robots they're deploying.
That's right.
And the reason why they can do it is because they're in a very structured environment. So in a warehouse, they know exactly where the item is, they know where to get it. The difficulty in what you're alluding to is how do you put a robot into the real world? And it's this real world where you have this unstructured environment. One, you have a lot of moving parts, but also the item or the task the robot has to do, usually a specific task to be effective. And so what is that task? And so even like in grocery, was that item exactly where it was supposed to be, or was it a little bit off? Did they stock it in the right location? So that's very difficult to do as you're trying to move these robots into the real world. And where people have failed in the past is they really try to, it's a mindset, because if you're coming from a robotics industry, it's like, oh, everything is structured. So they try to have this fully automated solution. And then the second is they try to then pick everything. It's like, oh, we're going to go into a grocery store and we're going to have to then pick all the items. And so what we're doing is, so that's how it's failed, is because they really try to think about it as a robotics problem, and they try to automate everything. They try to do that. And so what we're doing with Blue Collar is we're saying, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have actually a person behind the robot, which you find is actually the best practice now for any deployment in the real world, because the robot's out there, but you need somebody observing that robot. You need them to, where in difficult situations, making those decisions. And that's so for if you have delivery robots or even the shared ride share now, they still have people that are washing those cars. If there's a problem, they can help get them out of the problem. So you really have to have a person behind it. We've designed that into our robotic solution. And then the second thing we're doing is that because e-commerce now is so evolved and they have their processes right now, is that we're saying we're only going to pick a certain percent of the items in the store. So we can do packaged goods, which are easier for us to do because they have a very uniform surface. And so you don't have to worry, and we can use a vacuum suction rather than a hand or a special manipulator. So it really allows us then to be effective in picking items that we can. And we find that packaged goods is what we're focused on, actually represents a large percentage of the basket. So even if we don't go after everything, we can still pick about 65% or more of what a traditional e-commerce order would be. So it really allows us to deploy now today into the store where others have failed.
Feels like a great time to just bring it full circle. Can you introduce Blue Collar Robotics for us and just tell us like what you're building, why you decided to sell labor instead of hardware? Because that's a pretty unconventional call. And we'll just break it down on what's your why.
So Blue Collar, I mean, what we're doing is, as I mentioned, or we discussed, we design and build a purpose-built robot. So instead of having this humanoid, we say, what is the problem and what type of device do you need to attack that problem? And so we've designed a robot very specifically to be able to deploy directly into a supermarket and pick groceries just like a human would pick the groceries. And so we're able to do that because we have a very unique device that can kind of do that task. And so that's really what our purpose is. And then also we're doing it in a way that we can really deploy it into the store so the store doesn't have to change anything in their store. It really works as a person. And then where traditionally maybe in robotics, you would sell that robot or that machine, but then you have to have this big kind of organization behind it. But when you're selling to an industrial customer, a lot of times they have that resource. For a grocer, they're not robotics people. It's
right.
not an
They don't have any
industry.
of that.
So you need to be able to drop it directly in. And we're really just selling that service because we're just saying we can pick an item in your store for this cost per pick. And so they don't have to worry about being, hiring robotics experts or other things. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we also have people behind it. So it's part of the deployment is you have this person that's actually providing some control, and then over time, the device is learning. So we're really just selling a service, which is much easier for the customer to adopt. And Paul probably can speak a little bit to the difference between what we're selling, because we're selling, it's really a cost per pick. So it's more of an operational expense or an hourly expense rather than a big CapEx expense.
Yeah, 100%. So I think, the team are looking at it in a flexible way in terms of a retailer could buy the device and then have the service, or it could just be a fully loaded service model. Either way, the capital outlay is significantly lower than any other type of automation that's out there. And it just gives you more flexibility to choose to do more or do less in various markets, in various stores. So it's highly flexible as opposed to being quite rigid. I've now invested, I built a thing over here. That thing I can't move if the customers move, if volume moves, if markets move, if I want to open a new store, but it means it's going to take volume from that store. I've locked myself into a grid, a very expensive grid, whereas this is obviously highly flexible and easy and quick to deploy and actually integrate quite seamlessly with the existing processes that most retailers have invested in and equipment that they've invested in, whether it's the totes that they put orders in, the way they've managed the room where they consolidate the orders before it goes on the truck. Is that the team have done a lot of work to sort of go, you can really drop this in without significantly disrupting the operating model of the store around how it's been built around it, but just maximizing all sorts of flexibility in that box or outside of that box if you want to move the volume to somewhere else because customer demand changes.
Seems super smart. I'm still trying to picture this. So for some of our listeners, paint us this picture. I'm a customer. I order groceries online. Then what would happen next? Like, what is a live deployment actually look like from the moment I hit checkout to the bag showing up, and what's going on in the store?
Yeah, it's very good. So we can be very clear on how our solution fits into the store. So e-commerce is very popular because people, like we call it, it's the curbside pickup is really what we're talking about, where somebody wants that convenience of being able to just place an order online. And when they're driving home, they can stop by the store and they can pick up their groceries. They're all bagged for them. They can pick them up. So the consumer goes online, they place their order. It's no change, absolutely no change to the way they do it now. And all we're doing is we're providing, as we mentioned earlier, a labor solution. So a store will deploy our robot into the store that really takes the place of maybe some staff doing these center aisles, the very routine items. And so they place their order, the order goes to the store collects, lots of orders from the night before. Then they hand out all those orders to the employees, basically to go pick those orders. And then they pick all the orders, they take them to the back room. They basically then organize them according to different customers. And they're basically waiting for them when the customer comes to pick them up. Our robot works just like a person. So there's no change as far as the process from a traditional e-commerce order. And there's no change for the store or anything. And the beauty of what we're doing is that the store is already set up because they have to segment the orders because they're getting all these orders in and they have to break them down into fresh, into frozen, into ambient. And now they can actually assign a robot category. And so these would be items that we would pick versus then what other associates. And then what we see too is that then they can redeploy their associates to focus on higher value activities, such as picking the fresh items. So now they have people that can really take care and do a good job on fresh. And then we pick the ones that just take a lot of time and are very, you have to run around the center aisles and all of that. So that's why we see it. It's nice because we're not really replacing everything. We're just focused on a certain part of the order, which it would be segmented already to their associates. So I hope that explains.
Think about frozen.
Yeah.
That has to add like a whole wrench into the whole system.
Yeah, and that's what we don't do, because right now our robot, and that's why we can deploy today, because we're just focused on items that we can reach. So anything behind a glass door, like a frozen item,
Right. You're not trying to open a case.
We can't do that right now. So anything that we could actually access is what we could pick.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I guess between that and because you're moving the cost to be more of an operational cost in this model versus a CapEx outlay for the grocery retailer, I would think that must be where the conversation probably starts out with and brings in the advantage. Because I imagine in any conversation you would have with the retailer, maybe Paul, you could speak to this as well. When you look at other types of solutions out there, like we've seen Ocado, right, had their centralized fulfillment centers. We see micro fulfillment centers, and you mentioned earlier about how you have to find the space to set aside for that, and there's still a capital outlay for getting that built out. We've seen dark store concepts where it's just not a customer accessible store, but it's set up like a store for this kind of picking. And then you have an Instacart model where you're just kind of outsourcing the whole thing, right? Basically the entire process, and then hoping that you still can retain that customer as your customer and along with that process. And I know there are lots of other startups trying to solve this. Is that really the focus? I mean, is that what everyone else is essentially getting wrong? That by approaching this the way you are, it's the approach of how you integrate into their existing process, plus it be more of an operational cost than a CapEx cost?
I think, well, all of the models have OpEx associated with them, and then they can be high CapEx. If you think of a highly automated CFC, you have to have a large block. You have to build a very large facility. You can automate a whole chunk of it. But when we talk about automation, we're talking about effectively goods to man. So you've still got people doing the final piece of putting it into a shopping basket for a customer. There's just automated bringing the product to a person to put it into an order. And you don't have high degrees of automation with fresh either. You've still got people needing to go and pick the stalk of broccoli, pick the right apples, those types of things. So you have got this huge CapEx expense to highly automate the percentage of the store that Hank's pretty much talking about now, other than probably chilled and frozen, can be automated a little more, being brought to a person. And so the next step down from that is, well, that's very expensive, and you have to have high density in terms of orders to make the economics work, which means you're sort of moving the order further away from potentially where the customer is in terms of having to be delivered. So, you might be now doing lots of delivery routing to try and get that volume out. So you sort of step back to an MFC, which is saying, well, let's put in some degree of automation adjacent to the store, but you're limiting yourself again to what you would be doing in a large CFC, but you have to have the space next to the store or cut back your store footprint to fit the unit in. You still have people involved. You've still got people picking, fresh. You've still got people picking what we'd call the uglies. You can't really automate someone ordering a broom or a mop. It's very hard to, have that done. Someone still has to go and get those things. You've still got goods to man. You've got people inducting the product. You've got people finishing the order, and you're having to duplicate inventory because you've got the inventory in the store over there for your regular in-store customer, and then you've got to have inventory over here to fill, the MFC box. So again, if the economics may work in a store that you really want to push online volume into to service a catchment, but then you're again slightly further away from the customer. What Hank and the team have done here is recognize the fact that even with those two things, a large proportion of eGrocery fulfillment is still going to happen in a physical store, which is closest to the customer how do we bring automation to the areas that you're trying to automate in a really CapEx heavy way? So you're significantly reducing the CapEx and you're replacing the OpEx component that you were saving over in the high CapEx deployment over here by not having the person pick that 65%, of the store. So in that sense, it becomes really a no-brainer. And I think what Hank and the team need to do is focus on making that, I'd say it's more than a dream because they've made significant progress, just bringing that to a reality and being able to demonstrate that in a practical way to go low CapEx, you'll get the same saving that you're going to get by high CapEx automation. You're closer to the customer. It just makes logical sense for this to be a significant part of any level of automation of eGrocery fulfillment on the go forward.
Yeah, and I'm thinking more too about on the labor point, because I know so many people when they hear robotics in this scenario, they immediately think, oh, because we're eliminating jobs, right? The goal is to eliminate the labor, but that's not really the message you're bringing to this, is it? It's not really about that.
It's not, because this is an age-old question for automation. I mean, you go back to the 1900s when maybe 4 people worked on a farm, that were in, and then you bring in automation to farming. And now, maybe it's 2% of people work on a farm, but you have, a lot of food out there, and it's expanded greatly. So every time you have a new technology, that's always kind of the thing that you're really trying to unlock the growth of that industry. And so for our case, we're really, when we deploy, we allow then people to kind of be deployed to those higher value activities. That's normally the case. So I think when they said, like, when ATMs were introduced, they thought, okay, you're going to eliminate all the tellers. Now, what the tellers do, you don't have to stand in long lines waiting for them to count out money. Right. When you get up there, they can actually focus on customer service. So the nature of their role changes, and it's a higher value. And that's traditionally through any technology you change. But the main thing for grocery that we see is it's growing. So now it's a certain percent, say it's 15%. Maybe in the next 2 to 5 years, it could double. So there's not a long line of people waiting to have picking jobs. They're trying to find people today for those picking jobs. Right. What are they going to do next year, the following year? Yeah. So we're providing them a labor resource that can allow them to scale what they're doing today. Because right now, as the human labor doesn't scale. And so you're really providing them a scalable solution so that they can grow their business and be effective, and run a profitable business. So that's the way we view it.
I think my build on that would be, you're absolutely right. It's a growth area, so it's probably redistributing the existing people to more higher value. Like, you want to differentiate on fresh. You want to do these other things here. You want great curbside service for people who pick up the orders and those types of things. So it's tapping into being able to have the growth associated with this, and that problem I spoke about before. So either it's a cost problem in some markets around having people work overnight, it's a safety problem as well, but actually it's fundamentally a problem of finding people that would want to work at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. And if you go back to the start, I said one of the fundamental problems that is going to be hitting grocers as this continues to grow is, how do I make sure that my in-store customer is not getting a terrible experience? So if you think if e-com is going to continue to grow and nothing changes, and you can only get people to work during the day, it becomes a battleground of people who want to do their own shopping versus people running around with carts trying to do somebody else's shopping. So this actually also helps retailers open up a 24-hour operating clock, because they can have robots working, overnight with some level of supervision where people don't really want to do that work to help me manage the growth, because otherwise it's going to tap out, because the in-store customer is just going to get a woeful experience. And then you'll start losing in-store customers. So you actually don't get growth. you effectively find yourself becoming a dark store by design because no one wants to come and shop in your store because of all these people running around with carts. So this is just maximum flexibility for retailers to make really good informed decisions around managing their business. Low CapEx. It starts playing more in the OpEx space. So they're making OpEx decisions around saving here to invest here, or finding people to work where I couldn't find people to work before to manage growth and the overall customer experience.
And I think the consumers already started experiencing frustrations with human pickers when they order online. Like not getting the right product, not getting the right size, saying that it's not available when they can just walk in the store and go get it off the shelf. I think, I don't know about you guys, but I know I've gotten some really bad deliveries.
Yeah, that's true.
But so I'm sure like just improving accuracy even.
Yeah.
Almost that consistency, because when they hire me, they're hiring a corporation to do the picking. And so we're signing up for a quality standard. When they hire a person, either in high school or whatever age they may be picking, they don't know what they're getting. And then they have to train that person. So you have so much variation in people, and then the turnover is so high. So then, you're always struggling with, how do I train that person? So even when they maybe get to an expert stage of picking, they go and find a better job somewhere. So you always are fighting that turnover. So it's that quality standard is, once you hire a corporation, we sign up for a pick rate. So we're going to pick so many items per hour, and we're going to do it at a certain quality standard that you can count on it. If not, they don't pay their bill. So that's really, it's contractual.
Yeah. 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 I think this is a fascinating approach to doing that. I guess one of the things I want to bring up, because we've gone this far in the conversation, we're talking about retail technology, and no one has brought up AI and how AI is being used, which I think we probably should all get a gold star for that, for having gone this long without bringing it up. I'm kind of wondering if we're going to see parallels to, one of the things we're starting to see out there now, even from a regulatory perspective, is a little bit of, I'll use the word backlash, even though I personally don't think it's justified, to electronic shelf labels. Partly from a labor displacement argument that, much like what we're talking about here, isn't really the argument, right? Because that's not what we're trying to accomplish. And I don't think that's what ESLs do either, but it's causing regulations to be talked about. And I'm wondering if, this is sort of a prediction, but like, do you see something happening in that direction, that if this mode becomes more and more used by grocers, do you think there's going to be a moment where there'll be regulators wanting to insert themselves into this process in some way because of a fear, whether it's around labor or something else? And in my mind, it's not taking into account the positives. And I think you brought up a great one just now about the consistency, which is fairly all over the place when we talk about different human pickers, because you just don't know if the quality of the training is really up to the bar or not. But do you think that that's something that's going to show up at some point here?
You probably have more experience in this.
I think regulators always want to take a look at things where there is change in an industry and how things work. So I dare say it will capture regulator interest. You've now got robots interacting with people. I don't think, and way it be designed, that you're going to have any safety issues or anything that comes from that. But the fact that is the case is going to mean that people look at it. And you see it with any new technology. And there are pluses and minuses. You speak about electronic shelf labels. Yeah, like, sure, there's a small saving with people not having to change tickets, but in the grand scheme of a supermarket, that's easy to absorb. But what are customers getting? They're getting accuracy and pricing. Right. They're not having someone forgot to change a label, and so they've got to I'm sure it'll be looked at, as with all these things, but on balance, it's a no-brainer, and I hope that people don't try to interfere too much. But yeah, people need to be sure that when you change something in a business, particularly where you're interacting with customers, people have safety concerns and those types of things, that you might be able to demonstrate that you've put good controls over things to manage that. And I think that's why Hank and the team are have really got the right approach here, where the level of human supervision early on is quite high. And yes, as you learn more, as the robots learn more, as the people supervising the robots learn more, whatever else, you may not need as many people supervising the robots, but it's always going to be there. There needs to be this level of oversight. It's just, how does technology help someone have oversight over multiple robots as opposed to a one-to-one relationship? But the team are approaching this absolutely the right way, where it's effectively a remote person starting this journey, not
on purpose. And I'd like to say on purpose for that reason, because you see online, maybe you have the delivery carts now and they're kind of getting in the way of people and they're trying to automate them more. That when we're in a store, we want to have an etiquette. So for us, there needs to be a robot etiquette where you let the person do their shopping, you're hanging back. And that's part, you mentioned AI, that's part of the training. So when our person is actually navigating that, the robot is learning, but the robot's learning directly on then how it should interact and how it should navigate within a store. So that's part of our training actually. And it's for that specific reason, is we don't want, it's easy to navigate right now in a store with hands off. The robot can go down the thing. The problem is they're always getting in the way of people. And I see it if you're like in a 5-star hotel now in China, is you'll be walking down the hall and here comes this delivery robot coming at you, and it's like you have to jump out of the way. I don't want that. I want to enjoy my experience. That's fine. Hey, nobody wants that. So we really are trying to design in an etiquette, and that's one of the reasons we have a person behind it to start.
I think that's a really good point that we haven't really brought up. Hang, tell us a little bit about what's normal in China.
What's normal in China?
When it comes to like robots and like, I mean,
it's definitely evolving quickly. Yeah, as far as robotics, and that's why you mentioned earlier, you see a lot of the dancing robots now.
Yeah.
The problem is that they can evolve a little bit. They're still looking for kind of a use case because they have these general purpose devices. So they can make a lot of great technology, but it's really trying to find the applications where we flip it really more. What is the problem? What type of device do you need? So that's what we're focused really on, these purpose-built robots. But the early deployments in China that you see are the delivery robots, I think, in the hotels, because you have a big delivery business. So when the delivery driver gets there, they will hand it off to the concierge. The concierge will put it in the robot, and then the robot will deliver it to the room. And that's very common now. You'll have many robots in these things. Also in food areas where the servers can stack the plates on a robot, and then the robot will take the plates. So it's really around this navigation. That's why I say navigation is fairly mature today. But in China, maybe they're willing to tolerate some inconvenience, where we're trying to deploy, we don't want people to be inconvenienced, because you want to have a good customer experience in a store. And that's what we pay a lot of attention to that.
I think there's a weird higher order philosophical question here around, if you look at historically how robotics has been implemented and has worked, is I build a special world for the robots to operate in. What Hank and the team are trying to do is saying, no, we need to build robotics that works in the real world how it is today. So in the middle with some of these things is, are you gonna try and deploy robotics and forcibly change the real world to make it work for your robotics? Is it sort of like, sorry, the robots always win, so get out of their way, because the world has to accommodate the robot versus the robot is being built in a way with a task that actually fits into people's existing world? I think it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch how robotics actually unfolds and how different countries and cultures might think about this differently. But I think what Hank and the team are doing here is going, no, we need the robot to work in a very unstructured world where we're not going to suddenly come in and have a long list of rules and etiquette at the front of the store for physical customers so that the robots can work perfectly in that environment, which is why they're putting the resource and the focus behind the scenes to make that not happen. And I think that's the right approach. Who knows where it'll all end up in, 50 years time. But, I think that's the really interesting thing about how robotics have historically worked, the approach the team's taking versus how various markets and cultures might actually try and compromise the middle and start going, well, actually, people need to change for these robots to work effectively. So therefore, you must change, robot wins.
Right.
So it would be a really cool place to see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great way to frame it.
Exactly, right? People are so great at changing. We're like masters of that,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I feel like building the tech is one thing. I can imagine selling it is like a whole nother animal. I don't come from the grocery space, but I can't imagine that they're exactly known for like moving quickly. I haven't seen that on as a consumer of grocery. What are these conversations like when you walk into a room? I imagine, is there a difference between like a risk averse grocer or a more forward grocer, or are they all pretty much starting at the same spot?
Yeah. Well, what we've seen is that there's a problem. Like we've been talking this whole conversation, and it's a real problem. So as we're out there and more people learn about our solution, the big, national retailers, they're finding us and approaching us because they understand there's a problem. They're looking for a real solution. So they're leaning in to try to understand it and want to do it. I would say what we're finding though right now is that it's still maybe a little business as usual. Even they see, okay, here's a great technology, and we know we have this a big competitor over here trying to get. It's getting no, people run their business the way they run their business, and to get that urgency is still a challenge. So I would say it's not necessarily on the sales side, but it's more on the urgency side because this is coming. It's coming, and Amazon, as we had talked, is also looking at this business.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily business as usual, but Paul may have a little more experience on that as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't say retailers are as slow as you might think as a customer. There's lots of things that happens behind the scenes that customers would never see that they work on very quickly. And I think that's the difference. If you have a large franchise business that is operating with customers, when it comes to something that customers will see, touch, and interact with, you naturally go, hang on, I want to be really sure that this is the right thing to do and start deploying. It has some team impacts we've spoken about, and it will have big customer impacts. So when you move into that space, there's a brave person that wants to be bleeding edge versus leading edge. And so the team are doing the right approach, talking to the right retailers around how do I de-risk the way we interact and the way we deploy and the way we test this thing so that we're not exposing you to those issues for you to get the confidence that this is now worth the squeeze. It does what it says on the tin. It's delivering what it says it should do. So now I'm happy to move it into the real world where once I start this journey, everyone knows, our team know, our customers know, we're going to have to be confident that, it interacts with customers well. So I think the team are in that sort of space now around how do you carve out the right environment to really prove that this is the future. I think once they move through that point, at some point, they're going to be at a problem where they're going to have more people coming at them than potentially they're able to deal with if they get this right and they prove it out. So it is a sensitive thing to try and manage early on, and the team are approaching it the right way with the right partners and thinking about how they can prove it out, without disrupting someone's business model or exposing their customers to risk, and those types of things. And that's where you typically see a divergence in retailers around behind the scenes stuff that doesn't interact customers. They're actually really quick and they're doing some really cool and wonderful things that just customers don't see, but is transforming retail. When it comes to something that customers interact with, yes, they tend to be a little bit more risk adverse to dot their I's and cross their T's before it gets sort of thrown out into the great retail environment. So yeah.
This has been a really great conversation, you guys. 5 years from now, when we look back at this exact moment in retail and robotics, what do you think we'll realize that maybe we all underestimated?
As Paul just stated, I think once they kind of get through this and understand that they can introduce into the store, it will move quickly. So if I have to look out 5 years, this is going to happen a lot faster than we can imagine. It's going to just catch on, and people are going to say that is the right solution. And the second thing I would say is this interaction between the robot and the people, that I think that 5 years from now, you probably have a pretty good acceptance where people interact just daily. When we go out and do some of our demos now with our robot, it's always interesting. We'll be in a crowded environment and we're doing a demo over here and people are just carrying on and with their conversations, it's like, oh yeah, there's just a robot over there doing its thing. So I think for me also the acceptance, how well it's really accepted into society will be a little bit different than what we're thinking right now. Because right now it seems like they're pretty far apart, but I think they'll come together a lot quicker. That would be my comment.
It seems like a lot more fun job than packing groceries.
Yeah.
Well, it's I mean, and also just as the operator too, is that if you can do the work of 5 or 10 people sitting at a desk rather than running around. When I got into this business, I worked as a picker for a month. It was one of the hardest jobs that I had.
Yeah.
Because it's very demanding. Yeah.
There's a democratization of a piece of work. At the moment, you can only do that work if you can physically turn up to a particular store in particular hours to do that job. Mm-hmm. Now you can do that job from anywhere
at any time.
And also if, different abilities.
Yeah.
If you, for some reason, couldn't walk, there's no way you could currently go and pick orders. But if you're unfortunately confined to a wheelchair, you can now be picking orders from anywhere, anytime. Like it actually is democratizing a significant piece of work to be done from anywhere by anyone, as opposed to in that location in these hours physically doing that.
Makes sense.
That's the name of the company, Blue Collar Robotics. We're trying to define a new type of work for people.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
I think it's great.
Yep. Well, Hank, Paul, this has been a really fascinating discussion. I've got so many takeaways on robotics and grocery, but from the unique approach that you're taking to it. I can see why our friend Britton on LinkedIn is always giving such high praise to the work that you all are doing and why he recommends that grocers really need to be talking to you. It all really paints a much, brighter picture to this kind of solution to really advancing eGrocery than other options that are out there. So I really want to thank you both for joining us today.
Yeah, well, thank you. We appreciate the time to be able to talk about it and let more people know about this solution that's available to them.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea we were here yet. So, I mean, just very enlightening. I will have a zillion questions. I know how to reach you, but if anyone in our audience or listeners want to learn more and reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, we're on LinkedIn, so it's Blue Collar Robotics. So it's very easy to find. And also our website, bluecollarrobotics.ai. You can find us our website, and there we also put our blogs every month trying to talk about a new topic, things that are very pertinent to retail and what we're doing in grocery.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, this episode is a wrap, Ricardo. How much did you love this episode? Drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Good Pods. And if you're watching us on YouTube, like and subscribe before you go. I'm Casey Golden.
Follow us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram, and subscribe to our Substack newsletter for highlights and bonus content. For transcripts and guest info, visit retailrazor.com. I'm Ricardo Belmar.
Thanks for joining us on the Retail Razor Show, part of the Retail Razor Podcast Network.
Until next time, stay sharp, stay human, and stay ahead. This is the Retail Razor Show.